Welcome back to Incremental, the continuous improvement podcast. I'm Devin Bedoni.
And I'm Uriel Eisen.
And today we're going to have an episode focusing on how to guide focus in the business, focus on improvements, and also a little more discussion of production leveling.
Sounds good.
You had a couple good quotes.
Oh yeah, quote for the week.
Sorry.
So
this
is
specialty.
So we got from the E-Myth. This is sort of a double whammy of a quote. Systems run the business and people run the systems. From the E-Myth. I don't know if it's a direct quote. It was quoted in a talk by Kurt Richardson, founder of Otterbox.
Oh.
Great How I Built This, recommended by Joe over at Cobra Frame Building. Shout out to Joe. And in it, he also said, basically, his explanation was people shouldn't recreate their jobs every day, which really resonated. And it's something we're actually sort of digging into currently. You walk in the shop every morning, we do virtually the same thing every day. I mean, with variation, but somehow those variations take up, I would guess, 80% of our time in terms of figuring out, like, what do we do first? Like, in what order is everything done? And it's interesting to try to systemize that stuff and move away from it. Like, I don't know how you deal with a pull system where theoretically everything should only happen when it needs to happen. But then if you have production leveling, that should look like a routine, even if that routine shifts slightly day to day, right? Like the color I'm painting maybe changes, but everything else stays virtually the same.
Yeah.
And we are moving to a leveled approach where we look at a rolling average to decide how many buckles we produce a day.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd think we could get in there and just be like, all right, from, starting at 9, we do this takes 10 minutes, then we go do that.
Yeah.
And we haven't done that because it feels inflexible, right? Like it feels like the second something changes, you have to come up with a new plan.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
I think, not to say this isn't tackleable, but I do think it is in some way a symptom of our scale, in that I think once you get a little bit bigger and people have a little more dedicated tasks or roles, kind of the percentage shifts to a more reasonable, where they're like 80% routine, 20% mix it up,
right?
Versus now, because you are the few people in your shop are jumping from task to task to task, it's hard to get that ratio where you can kind of like lean on your routine as sort of the foundation of your day and fill in. And I don't know if I'm describing correctly, but I sometimes experience that, I think, in our shop.
Yes. I will say, though, I feel like that's letting ourselves off the hook a little bit. Mm-hmm. And I say that because it feels like a really tangled up problem to even try to solve.
Mm-hmm.
But we haven't really tried. Like we haven't said, okay, from this hour to this hour, we're doing X. And then after 2 weeks of doing that, kind of revisiting and saying, is this working? Mm-hmm. It just feels so unapproachable. I think we haven't really tried anything. So I am curious.
And do you think it is something you can tackle? And it's like similar to, we were talking about with Kanban, like just increasing quantities doesn't make the problem go away. It just defers it.
Yeah.
I think similarly, like increasing scale doesn't make the problem go away. It just hides it a little bit.
But, no, I think you're right. I mean, like, I think there's a lot of things where it's a funny size because in terms of getting work, in terms of keeping employees busy, like small shifts in our business, because we're a small business, are actually huge shifts in the business. Right? Like,
right.
Yeah, if we were closing 100 deals a week, it would be very different than 10 deals a week by an order of magnitude. And so now if we do 9 versus 11, that's actually a 10% swing. Whereas in a 100 deal kind of
Yeah,
weak, that's a very small percentage. Is this a phone?
probably.
Um.
Apologies to everybody.
Anyway, so that's the quote. Yeah. Do you want to dig into your?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, kind of going back to production leveling here, and sort of the way we've set up our systems in our shop is very much a kind of a handoff role or roles, as I've described, like where each person in the shop kind of has their area of focus and area of expertise, which I think is
Right.
good. The one kind of hole in the system right now is that we can't necessarily all cover for each other.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So like we're not, aside from myself, no one else in the shop can be kind of like project owners of the whole thing. And actually, even for myself, I can't. There's some things that I don't know how to do laser marking.
Mm-hmm.
At this point, it would be a little bit of a task for me to take on. What is going on?
Is this the first episode we actually edit?
Maybe. It would be a little bit of a task for me to take on shipping and tumbling and stuff, just because those systems are kind of owned by Ariel.
Mm-hmm.
Which, as I'm saying this, makes me realize that we need to, do some better documentation. But anyway, where I was going with that is that when we have work that has kind of a good balance of load across each of our skill sets and the different stations, things run really, really smooth. And this last week we had, I'm calling it a prototype job, but it's not technically a prototype. I think it was tooling, but small quantities, complex parts. And it was interesting just witnessing how much of a disruption it was in the overall flow of the shop because of that not distributed load. Basically, like I was fully occupied just doing those parts and had to do, and then Corum and Ariel kind of had to figure out how to keep themselves busy. I anticipated it being worse than it was actually. Did an okay job of keeping other machines going and keeping other processes going. But it was like definitely this kind of big speed bump that we had to get over. And so I think it's just interesting to think about production leveling not only as being the overall load on the shop, but also like how it loads different workstations or work centers or people, however you want to think about it. And that is equally as if, or it maybe even more important to the overall load in the than the overall load in the shop.
Interesting. Yeah. I guess that is sort of where cross training comes in, or could be. It's interesting. I think going back to what we were just talking about, like scale here, also, like you just don't have much to average across, and so I like, not to say that it's an exclusive problem of small companies. I think big companies, as you were sort of saying, maybe have the problem but don't fix it, or have the problem a little less, maybe.
I think at scale, you see this across all kinds of natural systems as well, when there's just like sort of more volume to absorb an influx, sort of, or I guess you see it like, like a classic environmental issue, right? Is where we take a watershed system that has all of this like surface area and, plant growth and stuff that can absorb a big influx of water when you have like 100-year storm event.
Yeah.
And then we pave everything.
Yeah.
And that goes away. And all of a sudden we have these massive floods that, destroy roads and all this stuff.
I'm trying to think what pavement is.
Well, I think
in this analogy,
it doesn't have as much surface area. It's like fewer, I don't know.
Like focusing the load on fewer.
On a small area or something. I don't know.
Yeah, but I think like given where I don't know, this might be an interesting problem for companies who are either going from one person in the company to planning for multiple, or just for very small teams. I think that is really interesting to think about. Yeah, I guess the levers there to me sound like cross training for sure. I mean, there's some amount of it like intentional lead generation or what jobs you take, but
I think you can approach it from both sides. Neither
yeah,
totally mitigates the problem.
right.
Yeah. I do think it is interesting, as you said, that like in a single person shop, the load is naturally balanced
Right.
because it's
like,
just you and you
yeah.
fit in everything you need to as you can. And maybe you're always busy, but there's not this issue of like idling people,
Yeah.
which was a big learning experience as I brought on employees for sure.
Yeah, I'm having that currently.
Yeah.
It's like just realizing that I need to dedicate more time to like documenting projects and sort of coming up with a overarching plan, whether that's a month or a week or 6 months or a year. It's like,
yeah. And getting a different sense of how kind of all the different tasks mesh, which I think I didn't when I was a single operator. Like I had a good sense of how different processes flowed, but not necessarily which processes needed could mesh that weren't necessarily linked.
yeah,
With some, with one person working on them, and then how, just like kind of like all of a sudden it becomes this puzzle that you can put together in a lot of different ways, and you have to figure out which ways work well and which ways don't.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I mean, going back to knowing what to do when you get in the shop. I mean, I know we've kind of talked about this quite a few times, but it's just a really hard nut to crack.
Yeah.
It sort of reminds me of sort of coming up with a playbook instead of an answer. Like there may be 5 answers that cover 95% of cases, right?
Yeah.
It's like this, we do this when we have a job that's heavy lathe work and no laser marking. We kind of like, zone defense kind of or whatever, right? It's like everyone kind of knows their role and everyone knows how that shifts things. But
yeah, or even like it's like thinking about my shop, it's like, okay, it's a Monday, we're on the back foot because of last week's machining or shipping or laser marking load. Machines aren't set up. Like, how are we going to best disperse our labor here to get up and onto the front foot again as quickly as possible, which is very different than coming in on a Monday where all the machines are set up with, jobs that are going to run for 3 days. And we're like, okay, how do we make best use of our time now? We need to focus on improvements. We need to focus on getting the next round of things prepped. And it's a different kind of play for sure.
And hearing you say that, I do feel like you'd actually save a lot of time if you made some of those things fairly explicit. Right? Like if there were sort of 3 modes to our shop, right? We're in mode A, B, or C. Mode A, and that is real, I bet.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know how many types it is, but it would be interesting to think about what is that main factor that you sort of check in with to decide where your shop is at. Is that sales load? Is it machines? Is it how many parts you have programmed that are ready to see a machine?
Well, coming back to the like multiple workstations or work centers thing, it might be different for each station, and you might kind of have to like look at the whole picture and pick an average, or it might be different for each one. And it's
so I've been reading some more Eliyahu Goldratt. I think there should be a bottleneck. And so I would imagine, seeing as you're meant to sort of prioritize everything else around feeding that bottleneck. I don't know. It's so hard to identify the bottleneck when the bottleneck is humans. And just like deciding how to alleviate that. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and there's also like, so it may not be practical for everybody in the shop to focus on that bottleneck. And so each work center, each person may have to, kind of run their own playbook on what they're working on based on their load and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it can be very variable. And if you're dealing with like a shifting bottleneck, maybe it's not your eternal bottleneck. It's like a Monday and we need to catch up.
Right. That suggests a higher level bottleneck that acts on all those stations, right?
A bottleneck or a disruption of some kind.
Could be a disruption.
Yeah.
But I believe, so the way Eliyahu Goldratt recommends dealing with disruptions, as he puts it, Murphy is alive and well. So you have to plan for Murphy. And depending on the effect, that's sort of how he drives inventory, like buffers in different places, like where your buffers are is specifically to deal with disruptions, according to him. And he has a very different, I think he calls it rope and drum method of, instead of like Kanban.
Yeah.
Method of, I kind of want to read more about it.
Rope and drum.
I think that's what he called it. There's like a pace setting function in the business, which is typically the bottleneck, I believe. And then these ropes sort of go taut if something falls behind, I think is the analogy, what it's analogous for.
What's the drum? Oh, is it like a drum pulling on the rope? I
think it was from that, he was talking about like the Boy Scouts on a hike. And so I think there was an imagined drum that would be the footsteps. I think that's where it came from. And then everyone's holding on to a rope. And if something goes tight, it stops everyone ahead of it.
Interesting.
I don't know. Oh yeah, because the things behind it can keep walking with a rope, right? And so anyway, I'm not sure exactly how it's implemented or what it does.
Interesting analogy.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway,
but fundamentally, it's another way of looking at Kanban, essentially, or flow, I guess, really.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I want to read more about it because hearing him talk about the issues with Lean, TPS, Six Sigma is all about, and he was basically like, companies start implementing this stuff because after reading about it, you'd be a fool not to, kind of. But then after a while of doing it, it sort of isn't yielding results or massive results. And so that's where people often fall off of the bandwagon, right? Where it's sort of like, okay, we're putting in a lot of energy here.
Yeah.
And we're training people on how to think about improvements. We're training people on how to spot waste. But like, it's not transformational. At best, it's sort of improving people's work slightly. And he, kind of attributes that to not working on the bottleneck and not solving the actual crux of the problem. And again, going back to that small shop, big shop and specialization and having people who are dedicated to particular workflows, I kind of am wondering if a lot of the sort of Toyota production system stuff is really written with the assumption that you sort of have people at every level who are experts in a very particular thing. That said, I kind of hesitate to make that statement because you're just zooming in and out, right? Like someone working on a production line, they use a screwdriver. They also lift and place the item that they're going to be attaching. Like they are doing multiple tasks.
Yeah.
They are more, I don't know. There's something looking at that feels different than someone who, like programs the parts, or you might be running a machine, or you might be doing sales, or you might be, but it still is a set of tasks.
Yeah, I think, I was going back to the Toyota way this last weekend, and it seems like a fundamental, like, kind of point that's continuously driven home is, regardless of the work and whether that is big picture or like shop floor work, is just having the people who do it improve it.
Yeah.
And so I think it's kind of, I don't know if it really matters how far zoomed in or out you are.
Right. And in hearing you say that, I think the part that does really matter and why those things are so different is, I think in a production, let's say you're working on a production line, I think it would be much more clear which part of your task is annoying or takes a long time, right? It's like your total day is picking up a panel, and screwing it into a thing, let's say.
Yeah.
And maybe you do a few different versions of that, but that's sort of the area you work. I could imagine looking at that and going like, okay, the biggest annoyance is that I have to bend over to pick those parts up off the crate. And so can we elevate the crate or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think maybe it's harder when you are doing sales and you're doing every single activity that's associated with sales, and you're doing production and you're doing every single activity that's associated with production.
Yeah.
There isn't like one that's glaring, partly because there's so many. And so there's a lot that are glaring.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think the other part is sort of a lack of sameness, right? Like we were just talking about, every day looks so different in a funny way that it
doesn't get put in relief, kind of the parts that are exceptional.
Yeah, and I think that's a big reason to make SOPs, and maybe even SOPs for like, what does our day look like? Or here's, it is so that you can run tests, I think, a big part of it. I mean, reading the literature on it, it's sort of like, without standards, you can't make improvements, right? It's like, it's hard to draw conclusions or to start to see patterns when you're doing things completely differently every day.
Yeah.
But
100%.
Yeah. Anyway, I guess we sort of moved from your production leveling theme.
No, I think just to wrap that up, maybe I think it is good to distinguish a little bit between, and this is hard for those of us who do everything in the business, but to distinguish between like the management tasks and the shop floor tasks. Like you're talking about somebody who picks stuff up and screws a panel in place all day. That is very different than someone whose job it is to level the schedule for the entire shop.
Right.
Both need to be improved. Like how you do that.
Yeah, which one needs it more?
Well, I think all of it needs it more. But
if you have more than 3 priorities, you don't have priorities.
But that those are different skill sets, and that the one is not going to fix the other, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Like focusing on the panel installation is important and will affect overall production. It won't fix your leveling issue. And also simultaneously focusing on leveling and fixing that problem is important. It's not going to fix your panel installation issue. And so I think it's just good to remember that they are discrete. They both need attention.
Yeah.
And that they're different skill sets. And
certainly.
And they take focus in different places.
Yeah. So all of the things I wrote down to discuss today, I think nearly all of them basically relate to this question. But I think it is challenging. Let's see. So the improvements, I think what's challenging and sort of makes a lot of this difficult to see clearly as a small shop is that any improvement that frees up human labor, I suspect that for most small shops, human labor is the bottleneck.
I think probably.
Right? It's like you should be working on sales, or you should be doing production, or like there's always something that like if you're doing this, you're not doing that.
Yeah.
And that is sort of throttling the business.
I'm sure there's outliers.
Yeah. But, right. Like I have an incredibly slow process, like machine, and it's the only thing we sell, and I just can't get more out of the machine or whatever. Right.
Yeah.
Like, there's probably those businesses. But I think it sort of means that all improvements are really worthwhile from a freeing up human labor perspective. But I think, I don't know what that static is. I think it makes it hard to decide where to put your time. Sorry, we were having small technical difficulties, so we just had to pause there and fix some things. Jumping back into it. Basically, having a business where labor is the constraint, even if it doesn't feel that way, right? If you have slow sales, that's probably because you're not working on sales enough, right? And like if sales are a little slow, and then you get a big order, and that keeps you really busy, but then coming out the back of that, you really don't have any sales.
Yeah.
or like a boom and bust cycle. That's all sort of like production leveling in terms of human time spent on processes you already have identified, even if they're not efficient.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, maybe not explicitly identified, but there's like workflows there that are kind of drive your business, and it works.
Yeah.
But it's just about populating those with time.
Mm-hmm.
And so any improvement, so I think like you read, I don't know, Paul Akers 2-second lean, right? It's like just try to shave 2 seconds a day out of the job you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Or you read the Toyota production system or the Toyota way, or I mean, there's so many books on the topic, and they're all very exciting and inspiring because it's kind of like, here's an example of a company that whatever doubled its production. And I think there's a few things that don't translate that well.
Mm-hmm.
One, to a very small business, maybe. Maybe don't transfer well. One is just that like you are jumping around as the employee. So you do essentially everything. And so now saying have the person who's doing the thing improve that thing, it's a little bit meaningless, right? Because that doesn't offer any focus. It's not like, you do everything. And so it's like, well, do I work on our sales process and making that a little more efficient? Do
Right.
I like which part of this should I be working on? And so I don't know. I think it makes it difficult. To be like maximally impactful, or I guess put a different way, it's like improving the process of improving, right?
Yeah.
To be most targeted. Because I know I've had improvements they're cool, but it's not,
Yeah.
it's not going to transform my business. And the other piece is reading about where these companies are typically coming from. Like, we don't have massive inventory costs,
Uh-huh.
right? Like, me carrying inventory is not financially crippling, right? It's like, yeah, maybe it's $5,000, which is a lot, but it's not like I have a much better use of $5,000. Like, I like to keep some cash in the bank. Now, inventory is not cash in the bank for sure. And I think it's still really important to reduce inventories, but it's not like you're going to double your business because you didn't realize how much you had dedicated to storing in, inventory.
Sure. Which a big company could be the case.
Yeah, I mean, massive warehouses, and that's all just due to, focus on storing inventory. Like, that gets really expensive.
Yeah.
And, we've talked about the space it's taking up in my shop, inventory, and that is real. And it is especially real as a percentage of my total floor space. So it's not like they're bad ideas. I just am feeling more and more like I need more tools on like zooming out another step and analyzing the business and deciding, okay, this month the focus needs to be this or whatever. And I don't know the reasoning exactly. Like, that could be from a efficiency perspective, that could be from a planning perspective of like right now I'm sort of feeling like we are working on launching new products, and we've already done sort of a soft launch. And just getting those through all the stations is eye-opening, right? It's like we're so optimized for what we currently offer that we do need a little bit of work to prepare for that. And I think doing that ahead of time would be good, but I don't know.
I sort of feel like you're answering your own question or in my head, you're answering your own question as you say it.
Yeah.
In that it's just like, well, going back to, I think it's the Ono quote of like just lowering the water level.
Yeah.
As like you just start somewhere, and as the noise in the room gets reduced, you can see more clearly. But I think if you go back to just like basic fundamental business stuff, it's like we need to sell the things. Are we selling as many as we want to sell? And if the answer is no, then you just kind of follow the path through why. And it seems like, as you said, what you're focusing on, it's like clear. It seems like you are doing what is correct, which is you've deduced that you need to launch new products. So that's where you're putting attention.
Right.
And in that process, it's highlighting issues. So that's where you're putting attention.
Yeah.
So I think I totally get what you're saying about feeling like you need to target. And I think there is a really good point here, which is not to become myopic. about just focusing on in station process improvements. Like that is a dead end road, I think, to some extent.
Yeah, I mean, there's a risk that you're making a really efficient bad idea happen.
Yeah,
kind of,
or even a decent idea.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
like
right.
making like one small part of it really efficient without improving all of the other processes that feed it.
Yeah, and I think the biggest risk there, maybe not the biggest, but a really big risk that often is overlooked is that, and I know I've experienced, is that you refine a particular process, and then when you zoom out and refine your full process, you eliminate that step. Right?
Right.
Yeah,
you're like, we're going to make this so good, it's so annoying, and then you're like,
we don't need that.
Just get rid of it.
Yeah.
For sure.
I've been thinking about that with our Tumblr, the ongoing saga of our Tumblr is I've been thinking like how much machine time is worth eliminating that step, right? Like if I didn't have to deburr, that is definitely worth a lot.
Yeah.
And so I've sort of been contemplating that.
That is very much worth considering. Yeah.
Just in terms of flow, because it's 2 hours in the Tumblr.
Well, flow, and also it's like a lot of human handling.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Every time
if it came out immediately and was ready to go on to paint, that would change my mental map of the shop and our next steps, I think, pretty substantially.
Right. Like you may always need, but there is sort of, how do I say this? There's aspects of tumbling that, well, as you've discovered, allow for some, laziness in other aspects of the process.
Yes.
Which can, lead to a lowered scrap rate overall, potentially.
Yeah. And just, I mean, the reality, it's like a safety blanket for machinists. It's like a comfort blanket. Like makes me feel, because the reality is like a tool gets slightly dull and starts raising massive burrs or not massive,
very small
just
ones.
Very small burrs that totally mess up the product. You can develop processes to stay like insanely vigilant about that, which is probably a good idea. Anyway, but trying to do that while also run the rest of the business is hard, and it's sort of mentally easier to say, okay, we will aim for no burrs right out of the machine, but also we're going to keep tumbling, and I don't know. Yeah, so
I think it's good. I mean, it's good to kind of have that in the back pocket, maybe and it can be a nice aesthetic as well. But I think you're also sandblasting, so it's kind of like the aesthetic is a little bit lost.
Completely lost if we do the sandblasting right.
Right. So that seems like a good goal.
But just to wrap up the focus piece, I believe that's what theory of constraints is all about. Unfortunately, he hid a lot of that wisdom in books that are fiction. But I finally found a book that is, I mean, it's not a book. It's just a recording of him lecturing.
You mentioned this.
And it is, no, so I found lectures that were tacked on to the end of his other books. But it's called Beyond the Goal. And it's so far, it might change, but so far it's just him lecturing.
I'm going to write that real quick.
Yeah. And so I'm really enjoying that. It's very dense. His lecture style is very interesting. It feels very Talmudic, where it's a series of questions that he then answers and they lead to the next question. It's sort of funny.
Interesting.
Yeah. He was also a physicist for many years before going into that. And he explicitly discusses the difference in approach of setting up like experiments, setting up definitions, where one sort of seeks simplicity. And if you can't simplify it, it means you don't understand the full system, essentially. Right? Like he was telling a story about if you weigh an item on one method of weighing it and it says 2 pounds. I don't think he used pounds. He's from Israel. And then you weigh it on another scale and it says 4 pounds. You don't go like, okay, maybe both are true, right? You say like either our equipment's faulty or like we're not.
Or we're in a different space-time continuum between the two.
Yeah, scales. Or... I mean, so many factors, but you sort of work on it till you figure out where that difference is coming from. You don't just accept that it's different. Whereas a lot of social sciences don't necessarily try to reduce things to very basic blocks. and assume there's a lack of understanding if you can't.
Interesting.
Anyway, yeah. Moving on, I was reading some more Shigeo Shingo. I'm forgetting which book I'm reading currently by him, but he mentioned block production, and that was applied in shipyards with extremely expeditious results.
I was reading this note this morning before I came over, and I was like, blocks in shipyards. And I was like boats sitting on blocks? I was like, where is this going?
So it's this idea of block production where if you can take a process that is a serial process, like building a ship was considered to be, you have to wait till the frame. I mean, I'm not a boat builder, but I mean, I've built small boats, but not massive
a sequence
ships.
Where things have to
happen in a particular order, and this group can't start till that group's done, and so on. Like you end up with dry docks that are occupied by one ship for 3 months is like not that's a fast build.
Yeah.
Right. And so they broke them down into these blocks where they essentially fully isolated a unit of ship that they could then build offline and do everything on, and they put in extra work on where those touch each other, right? To make it work, right? Like, how are we going to deal with plumbing? Are we plumbing right to the edge and then we sort of like trim and adjust? Do we not install the pipes completely so they're not fully rigidly coupled so you have a little bit of play, like these sort of things? And then they also mentioned that in a tire vulcanizing shop, building the vulcanizing tools used to take 42 days. And by breaking it out into these blocks, they got it down to 4 days. And that was a major limitation for their business, was just like the time it took to develop, to produce a new tool. But it also reminded me of this concept in sort of prototyping and process and R&D, research and development, like developing new products, is trying to isolate variables or isolate systems so they're not codependent is hugely beneficial for this exact reason, right? Like a change to one doesn't propagate across all of them. That could be in design, but that could also be in time. Like a change in schedule, a delay doesn't suddenly affect the whole. It's not added to the total time, right? Like every delay across every department isn't cumulative. They can all be delayed in parallel. But anyway, I thought that was striking. I'm not sure exactly where it applies to my business, but it's interesting to think about.
Yeah, I guess trying to put that sort of in the job shop scenario, I think it may sound obvious now, but like if you're blocking out your workflow for, in my case, machining parts, like, and we talked about this briefly around my job board organization, but it's like there's a block of things that can happen offline, which is like, all of the ordering, all of the, requesting information for post-processing, the programming, assembling tools, and those can all happen separate. And if you were to try and do those all sequentially, which, some people do, and I have done in the past, that adds up to a lot of time. If you distribute those among different people and run them in parallel, and then they all do have to align at this point where you start making parts on a machine. Right. But
you need the material in the machine. You need the tools in the machine.
You need the program in the machine. And that all has to align. And then after that, things can sort of distribute again. And I think it's good to realize, what those blocks are that can happen independently.
Yeah. And I think it's easy to start thinking of it as a, like just the state of things, right? Like we can't do it faster because this has to happen and this has to happen. And instead of going like, wait, what piece of this is sequential because of something that we could actually fix? Like I could imagine changing your programming approach so that it can produce the material requirements like as fast as possible to get that order out the door as fast as possible. Or like it could be an SOP. I mean, I'm making this up. It could be an SOP to identify like special tool requirements at the beginning, right?
Mhm.
It's like, that's a deep pocket. How are we machining this pocket? That's a tap we don't have. Like building out that list. I don't know if that would speed things up end to end, but yeah.
I mean, it definitely will if you miss that stuff and you have to order. So,
Right. You get to the end and realize,
it's pretty critical.
Yeah. And, 42 days to 4 days, I feel like that's pretty eye catching. And
Yeah.
trying to think how to do that in my business.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, maybe a big focus of yours does need to be on the product development side if you're looking at like where big gains can be made.
Yeah, and I read, I've been trying to become a little bit more explicit about how I do it. Actually, it's funny, not to tease people too much, but the belt I'm wearing currently, that buckle, I read Designing the Future, which I think I mentioned on the podcast. Really good book, highly recommend it. But trying to put some of that stuff in place, I sort of step back because I've designed, I don't know, many different buckle architectures, I guess, to try to make a belt. And it was sort of stopping all that and saying like, okay, what do I know? Like, what are the things that are clear and that I don't feel like will change? And then through making that list, kind of realized like that really steered me away from certain things, like on a belt, not to get too into buckles here, but on a belt, the width of the belt strap, it's ideal if it sort of fills out your belt loops.
Yeah.
If you have a quick release buckle as your belt, inherently, if you have to put the buckle through your belt loops, inherently the buckle needs to be wider than the webbing.
Yeah.
And so suddenly either you're wrestling it through your belt loops because it won't actually fit, or the strap is too narrow for the belt loops on your pants. And actually, there's a lot of tactical belts that use like a Cobra buckle, and I've used one, and it is a hassle to get through all of your belt loops. So like that. So then I was like, okay, I don't want a 2-piece buckle for a belt, and that was really helpful to kind of just take a step back, say like, what do we know here? In terms of like how friction is made, and anyway, all those things. So yeah, I think you're right. I think like improving the process of product development is key. So
yeah, that seems like a major, looking at the business as a whole, especially for your type of business.
Yeah,
that seems like some very low hanging fruit for improvement.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a big thing to improve, but as a focus for the business in terms of like staffing and, where you focus your improvements to allow that to happen.
Yeah, totally. Like it might sound, I mean, yes, the part of that is not addressed there is like still coming up with good products is hard.
Sure.
But there's so much that is not that like, for example, we've been talking about how to schedule our mill.
Yeah.
And it entered the conversation of like, how do we free up capacity during the day so we can do prototyping, right? Which is sort of pushing us more toward overnight runs.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, there is a lot there that
and if you
can be integrated.
If you accept that, I mean, you can always improve the process, but if you accept that at least at the beginning, coming up with new products is hard and may always be, then that will drive in even more concrete a way where you need to put.
Oh, true. Right.
If you're like, okay, this is going to be hard. It's always going to be hard. And it's going to take this much labor. We better hire somebody.
Hire, start now. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I think that is about wrapping us up today. That was more leveling. Seems like leveling is a theme lately, at least for us.
Yeah.
And what we're
leveling and then decreasing the cost of switching kind of to allow for leveling or something. Or yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks everyone for listening along, and we'll catch you in a few days.